I collapsed in the middle of the Saturday morning farmer's market, between a table of late summer peaches and a woman selling hand-stitched quilts, and my son never answered the phone, not once. In 4 days, the hospital called him 61 times. 61 calls. He didn't pick up a single one. 4 days later, when I finally opened my eyes to the sound of beeping monitors and the smell of antiseptic, the first face I saw wasn't my son's. It was a woman I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years, sitting in the chair beside my bed with her sneakers still on and dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. Because she hadn't. And 3 weeks after that, when the truth finally came out, I understood. My son hadn't been ignoring those calls by accident. He'd been very, very busy. He'd been on a ski slope in Colorado, posting videos, laughing, and signing papers that would have taken everything I owned. I want to go back to that Saturday morning, the 3rd week of August. Warm but not brutal yet, the kind of late summer morning that makes you feel like the world is still manageable, like things might just be okay. I'd been going to the Millbrook Farmers Market every Saturday for 22 years. My husband Howard and I started going together when we first moved to town, back when we were both still teaching, and the market was just a handful of stands in a church parking lot. It grew into something real over the years. 3 rows of vendors, a gazebo where local musicians played, the smell of kettle corn drifting over everything. Howard would always sneak a praline from the candy stand while I was distracted choosing tomatoes. He'd been gone 18 months by then. I still went every Saturday. It was one of the things I refused to give up, one of the small rituals that made the week feel like it had a shape. I had my canvas bags. I had my list. I had my route. I made it as far as the peach stand when the pain hit. Not gradual, not a warning. One moment I was squeezing a peach to check if it was ripe, and the next there was a pressure in my chest so sudden and so complete that my knees simply stopped working. I went down hard on the packed dirt between the stands. I remember the quilt woman dropping beside me. I remember her voice, urgent and clear. "Call 911. Somebody call right now." I remember the sound of the crowd, shifting, gasps, shuffling feet. I remember trying to speak and nothing coming out. That's the last thing I remember clearly. The rest came in fragments. Paramedics, an oxygen mask, the ceiling of an ambulance, a voice telling me to stay with them, just stay with them. At the hospital, someone asked for emergency contacts. My son's name and number were at the top of the list. I'd put him there myself after Howard died. Of course I had. He was my son. The hospital tried to reach him 61 times. I was in surgery before I knew what was happening. A blockage, a serious one. The kind that could have killed me on that dirt path between the peach stand and the quilts if the paramedics had been 3 minutes slower. I wouldn't know any of that for days. What I knew was darkness, then the sound of beeping, then slowly a ceiling. When I finally managed to open my eyes, 4 days had passed. I had been unconscious for 4 days, and the first thing I focused on was a woman in purple scrubs asleep, in the chair beside my bed, her head tilted at an angle that was going to hurt when she woke up. A hospital blanket tucked around her shoulders by someone who cared. I made a sound, something between a cough and a word. Her eyes opened immediately. For just a moment she looked confused, the way people do when they fall asleep, somewhere strange, and forget where they are. Then she saw me looking at her, and something crossed her face, so fast I almost missed it. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Mrs. Albright. She was out of the chair and at my side before I could blink. "Oh, thank God, you're awake. Let me get the nurse." She pressed the call button, and I lay there trying to make sense of things. Her face tugged at something in my memory, something from a long time ago. I couldn't place it. Not yet. Her name tag said Velma Okafor, RN. A nurse named Patty came in, checked my monitors, adjusted my IV, and explained with calm efficiency that I'd had a stroke. A significant one. Surgery had gone well. My recovery would take time, but I was going to be okay. "Is my son here?" I managed. My throat felt like sandpaper. Patty's expression didn't quite change, but something shifted behind it. "Your emergency contact was notified, ma'am. We've been trying to reach him." Velma, standing at the foot of my bed, didn't say anything, but she looked down at her shoes for just a second. "How long?" I asked. "You've been unconscious for 4 days," she said softly. "His number goes straight to voicemail." 4 days, 61 calls, voicemail. I lay there looking at the ceiling tiles and tried to think of explanations. His phone had died. He was somewhere without service. Something had happened to my daughter-in-law. Something had happened to my 8-year-old grandson, Tucker. Any reason. Anything that made sense. Velma pulled her chair close to my bed and took my hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "You don't remember me," she said, not a question. I looked at her again, that familiar pull. "You look like someone I knew," I said slowly. "A student." A small smile. "Velma Dawkins, class of 2010. You called me by my last name and let me sit in your supply closet during lunch when things were bad at home." And then it came back all at once. A 14-year-old girl who sat in the back of my 7th grade English class with her hoodie strings pulled tight, who turned in blank pages where essays should have been. A kid who fell asleep in 3rd period twice a week and looked like the world was consuming her alive and had made a private decision to let it. I'd kept her after class one Thursday afternoon in October. She'd cried for 45 minutes straight. Her mother was unreliable in the way that particular word means something specific and terrible. She had 2 younger brothers she was essentially raising at 14. I'd gotten her connected with the school counselor. I'd called family services myself. I'd tutored her 3 times a week for the rest of that year and the year after. She'd graduated with honors. I still had her graduation photo somewhere in my desk. "Velma," I said, "you're a nurse." "I work this unit," she said. "I was on shift when they brought you in Saturday. I recognized you from the lobby." She had claimed to be my emergency contact, signed the paperwork without hesitation. Sat in this chair for 4 days, going home only to change clothes and come back. My son had not answered 61 phone calls. "Thank you," I said. My voice broke on the second word. She squeezed my hand. "You don't get to thank me," she said. "You just get to get better." On the 2nd day after I woke up, Velma showed me her phone. I hadn't asked. She'd been sitting with me while I ate soup I couldn't taste, and her expression changed in a way that made me look up. "You should see this," she said quietly. She turned the screen toward me. My son's Instagram. I don't use social media, but I recognized the format, and I recognized my son's face in every photograph. The first photo, my son and his wife on a ski slope, veil visible behind them, both in expensive matching gear. Caption: "Finally got the mountain trip we've been needing, fully unplugging this week." Posted Sunday morning, 22 hours after the ambulance carried me out of the farmer's market. Velma scrolled. My son at a ski lodge bar, après-ski drinks in hand. No meetings, no emails, no stress, just this. His wife in a hot tub with a champagne glass raised, and mountains in the background, golden filter making everything glow. Then the one that took my breath away. Tucker, my grandson, standing at the top of a bunny slope in a small blue helmet, poles in the air, grinning his enormous gap-toothed grin like he'd just conquered something. Caption: "My guy crushed it today. Family time is everything." Family time is everything. I looked at that photo for a long time. They had cell service. The posts proved it. They had Wi-Fi. The timestamps, the tags, the comments they'd replied to. All of it required a phone in hand, a deliberate choice to pick it up and set it back down again. They had listened to 61 voicemails from a hospital saying I was in emergency surgery. And then they had put the phone face down on a ski lodge table and ordered another round. "No stress," I said aloud. Velma said nothing. She just sat there close enough that I knew she was there. I thought about Tucker's blue helmet, his gap-toothed grin. He was 8 years old and he had no idea his grandmother had nearly died. Of course he didn't. He was a little boy on a ski slope having the time of his life, and none of this was his fault. Not one bit of it. But my son knew, his wife knew, and they had chosen to let Tucker keep smiling on that mountain. I handed the phone back to Velma and turned toward the window. Outside it was raining, the slow gray rain of late August trying to become September. I had been lying in this bed while my family chose not to know. I want to tell you something I've never said out loud before, about my son, about the pattern I spent 15 years refusing to see clearly. When Howard was diagnosed 2 years ago, my son drove down for the initial appointment, sat in the doctor's office, asked good questions, took notes on his phone. He hugged me in the parking lot and said, "We'll handle this, Mom. Don't worry." Then he went home. Over the next 8 months, as Howard got sicker, he called every 2 weeks. 30-minute calls that felt like checking a task off a list. He came back once in 4 months and stayed 3 days. Howard asked for him in those last weeks. Not demanding. Howard was never demanding. Just that quiet way he had of saying, "Has he called?" And I would say yes, which was true, and I wouldn't say how distracted his son had sounded. Howard died on a Tuesday. My son arrived Thursday afternoon. He stayed 5 days. When he left, he hugged me and said, "You're strong, Mom. You'll be okay." I handled everything that came after entirely alone. The paperwork, the accounts, the house that suddenly felt twice as large as it needed to be. I told myself he was busy. I told myself he'd reach out more when things settled. The visits got shorter. The calls got further apart. Last Christmas, he and his wife took Tucker to her parents in Arizona. I got a video call on Christmas morning, 20 minutes, Tucker in the background unwrapping presents. My son turned the camera and Tucker waved at me, enthusiastic, sweet, and then ran to play with whatever he'd just opened. And my son said, "Good to see you, Mom. We gotta run." That was Christmas. I told myself even then that it was fine, that family's shift, that I didn't need to be at the center of everything. Lying in that hospital bed, I was finally done telling myself stories. Alberta came on the 3rd day after I woke up. She's been my next-door neighbor for 20 years. 70 years old, built like someone who has been walking 5 miles a day since 1975, and possessed of a directness I have always admired and occasionally found terrifying. She brought peach preserves from her own trees and set them on my bedside table without ceremony. We talked about ordinary things. Then she said, "I have to tell you something." I waited. "Your son called me," she said, "about 5 weeks ago, out of the blue. We don't really talk." She frowned slightly at the memory. "He asked how you seemed lately, whether I'd noticed you being confused about things, forgetful, whether I'd seen any trouble managing around the house." The cold feeling moved through me slowly. "He said he was worried about you living alone at your age," Alberta continued. "Asked if I thought you were managing okay." She paused. "I told him you drove me to my cardiology appointment last month when my car was in the shop. I told him you organized the neighborhood watch meeting and remembered every detail of it. I told him you were sharper than I am on most days." She looked at me steadily. He sounded disappointed. Before visiting hours ended that day, I learned that my son had also called Bertrice, the woman 2 rows ahead of me at First Methodist, who has known me a decade. Same questions, same concerned son framing, same disappointment when Bertrice confirmed I seemed perfectly fine. He was building something. Velma found the envelope the next morning. She'd gone to my house to water the plants and gather a few things. When she came back, her face had a careful, controlled quality to it, the way someone looks when they've already decided something is going to be hard, and they're trying to figure out the gentlest angle. She set a large manila envelope on my bed. "This was in your mailbox," she said. "I almost missed it." The return address was a law firm, Hargrove and Associates. I didn't recognize the name. Inside was a legal document, 12 pages. At the top, in clean type, Petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate. The subject of the petition was me. The petitioner was my son. I read it twice, slowly. The way I used to read student papers, I needed to be certain I was understanding correctly. The language was precise and careful. It alleged signs of cognitive decline. It cited concerns from unnamed community members. It argued I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. It requested that my son be appointed my legal guardian, with full authority over my financial decisions, my living arrangements, my medical care. Attached was an exhibit, a list of assets, my house appraised, Howard's life insurance payout, my pension, my savings account, everything tallied in clean columns. The petition had been filed 8 days before I collapsed at the farmer's market. My son had hired a lawyer and filed court papers to take control of my life before I fell down between those peach stands. The vacation wasn't just a vacation. It was a deliberate retreat, a ski trip with no stress, no drama, no difficult phone calls, easier than standing in a hospital room while the legal proceedings he'd already set in motion played out on their own. He wanted my house. He wanted Howard's insurance. He wanted the accounts I'd spent 30 years building. And he'd decided at 42 years old that the most efficient way to get them was to have a lawyer call me incompetent. I set the document on the bed beside me and looked at the ceiling for a while. I had spent 15 years making excuses for my son's absences. I was done making excuses. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know you're still with me. If you believe, a parent should never have to beg their child to show up when in the common sense. If you've ever found out that someone you loved was working against you when your back was turned, type 2. And if you believe it is never too late to stand up for yourself, no matter your age, no matter how long you've been waiting, type 3. I need to know you're here, because what came next took every bit of strength I had left. I called my attorney from my hospital bed. Her name is Miss Perdue, Eleanor Perdue. I've worked with her for 12 years since Howard and I updated our wills after his mother passed. Small woman, steel gray hair, the unhurried calm of someone who has seen every variety of human behavior and long since stopped being surprised. I told her everything, the 61 calls, the ski trip, the social media posts, what Alberta had told me, what Bertrice had told me, the guardianship petition. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short silence. I've seen this before, she said. Not often, but I've seen it. A pause. How certain are you? I've been making excuses for him for 15 years, I said. I'm done. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of that call, I had a plan. Ms. Perdue would prepare a revised will and contest the guardianship petition, which would fail, because the standard for appointing a guardian is high, and I was very clearly competent, something we would document with a formal cognitive evaluation within the week. The will was the other matter. I gave Miss Perdue my instructions. She didn't flinch. She took notes. I'll have everything ready by Thursday, she said. I was discharged on a Friday. Velma drove me home. When I walked through my front door, something settled in my chest that wasn't quite relief, and wasn't quite grief, but something in between. My plants were alive. Velma had taken care of them. Everything was where I'd left it, except for a stack of mail on the kitchen table that she'd sorted and labeled with small adhesive notes on anything that needed attention. I sat in Howard's armchair and let myself feel all of it. Then I got up and called Miss Perdue to confirm Thursday's meeting. My son called 9 days after I was discharged. I let it ring twice before I answered. Mom. That particular tone he used when he was managing a situation. I just heard what happened. I've been trying to process everything. You heard 61 times, I thought. You processed it on a ski slope. I'm home, I said. I'm recovering. I'm so glad. A pause. I feel terrible that we were out of contact. The service in Colorado was basically non-existent the whole week. He had posted 11 Instagram updates with Wi-Fi tagged locations. I said nothing. "I'd like to come see you," he said. "There are some things we should probably discuss. About the house, the finances, long-term plans, just to make sure everything's in order." There it was. "Of course," I said. "I'm meeting with Miss Perdue on Thursday. You should come to that." He came. Of course he came. The conference room at Miss Perdue's office had wood paneling and built-in bookshelves, and the particular weight of a space where serious things get decided. My son and his wife arrived 4 minutes early, both in what I could only describe as meeting clothes. They walked in, looking exactly like people who expected to leave with something. They stopped when they saw Velma sitting beside me. "Who is this?" his wife asked. "Her name is Velma," I said. "She's family." My son opened his mouth. Miss Perdue spoke first, pleasantly and without raising her voice. "Mrs. Okafor is here at your mother's request. Please sit down." They sat. I spoke first. I'd written notes on an index card but found I didn't need them. I told my son I knew about the 61 calls. I told him I'd seen the Instagram posts. I described the ski videos, the après-ski drinks, his wife's champagne glass raised toward a golden mountain sunset. I described Tucker on the bunny slope under the caption "Family Time is everything." I told him what Alberta had told me, what Bertrice had told me, the same questions, the same concerned son framing, the same disappointment when both women said I seemed perfectly sharp. Then I slid the guardianship petition across the table. "I know you filed this," I said, 8 days before I collapsed. The color left his face quickly. "Mom, that's not. I'm not finished." He stopped. "You hired a lawyer to declare me incompetent," I said. "You gathered statements suggesting I couldn't manage my own affairs. You did this while I was still driving my neighbor to her doctor's appointments, running the neighborhood watch, and tending a garden that looks better than it has in years. You did it because you wanted control of my assets, because you wanted the house. We were worried about you," he said, "living alone after Dad." "You were worried about Howard's insurance payout," I said. "You were worried about my pension." He looked at the table. "I watched your father die and you stayed 5 days and told me I was strong and went back to work," I said. My voice stayed level. I kept it level on purpose. "I handled everything alone after that. The paperwork, the accounts, the silence of coming home to a house built for 2 people. I called you every week for a year. You called back when you remembered. I haven't been to Tucker's school events in 2 years because you've never thought to invite me. Last Christmas, I got 20 minutes on a video call, and you left before I could ask how Tucker's swim lessons were going." He was looking at the table. "And then you filed legal papers to take everything I have," I said, "before you had the decency to pick up the phone." Miss Perdue opened her file. The revised will was specific and thorough. Tucker would receive a trust of $120,000 for education, managed by Ms. Perdue as trustee, with no parental access until he turned 18. The guardianship petition had already been formally contested. The cognitive evaluation letter from the specialist, documenting no deficits of any kind, was on file. The house would go to the Millbrook Community Arts Center, which ran after-school programs for children who needed somewhere to be. Howard had donated to them for years. His insurance payout had been directed to a scholarship fund in his name at the middle school where we'd both taught. My savings, my pension, divided between 3 local charities I'd chosen myself. To my son, nothing. To Velma, a bequest of $40,000 in recognition of, as the document read, loyalty that cannot be taught and should not go unacknowledged. My son stood partway through the reading. "You can't do this." "I have," I said. "She manipulated you." He pointed at Velma. "This woman showed up out of nowhere and—" "This woman sat in a hospital chair for 4 days," I said, "while you posted videos of yourself on a mountain." Miss Perdue's voice was calm and unhurried. "The will is legally sound. The cognitive evaluation is documented. The guardianship petition will be dismissed. I'd recommend not contesting this." My son looked at me from across the table, and I saw something I hadn't expected in his face. Not calculation, not anger, something smaller and more bewildered, like someone who has misread a room entirely and cannot locate the moment it went wrong. "We're your family," he said. "You were," I said. "You chose differently." They left without shaking hands. The call from Tucker's school came through Velma 3 weeks later. He'd been asking his teacher about me. Not dramatically, not in a way that alarmed anyone, but with the quiet persistence of an 8-year-old who doesn't have the words for what he's feeling. "Where's my grandma? How come I don't see my grandma?" He'd made something in art class and asked his teacher to help make sure I got it. The teacher reached out to the school's family counselor. The counselor knew Velma through a youth outreach program they both volunteered with. Velma drove to the school on a Tuesday afternoon and collected Tucker with my son's tight-lipped, reluctant permission. Permission he gave, I suspect, because refusing would have looked exactly like what it was. Tucker came through my front door, like something small and fast, and made entirely a forward motion. He stopped when he saw me standing in the living room in the afternoon light. For just a second he looked in the afternoon light, and for just a second he looked the way children look when the person they've been worried about is suddenly right there in front of them and they don't know what to do with the relief. Then he crossed the room and put his arms around me and held on. He smelled like school and slightly like crayons and like the particular thing that belongs only to him, that I'd known since he was 3 days old. "I missed you, Grandma," he said into my shoulder. "I missed you too, baby," I said, "so much." He pulled back and looked up at me with Howard's eyes, the exact same warm brown, the exact same directness, the way Howard always looked at you, like he was actually paying attention to what you were saying. "I made you something," Tucker said, and pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Soft at the creases from being carried a long time. I unfolded it carefully. He'd drawn the two of us, me with silver hair, he'd used silver crayon, which delighted me, and him beside me, both of us holding hands in front of a house I recognized as mine. Above it, in the proud wobbly capitals of someone who is very serious about his handwriting, "Get well, Grandma, I love you." I put it on the refrigerator before he finished his second cookie. It's been 9 weeks since that Saturday at the farmer's market. October now. The trees in front of my house have gone deep red and gold. That particular October blaze that Howard used to say was the trees showing off before the long sleep. My recovery is going well. I walk every morning, see Dr. Patton every 2 weeks. She says I am a remarkably compliant patient, which I believe means I do what I'm told, which is true, and which I consider a fair assessment. My son called twice after the meeting at Miss Purdue's office. I answered once, said I wasn't ready to talk, suggested we revisit the conversation in the spring. He hasn't called again. I don't know yet what that silence means. Some days I think it might be the beginning of something honest. Most days I think he simply needs more time to sit with what he did. Velma comes by twice a week. We've started watching the old British mystery series Howard used to love. The ones I could never follow on my own, but can follow fine with someone beside me to talk through the plot. We make popcorn. It is, genuinely, one of the better parts of my week. Alberta brought more peach preserves last Tuesday. We sat on my porch for 2 hours and talked about everything and nothing, the way two people can when they've been neighbors long enough to trust each other without having to say so. I booked a trip to the Oregon coast for January. Howard always wanted to go and we never got around to it. I am going for both of us. The house is staying. I decided that quietly, about a week after I came home. The Art Center bequest will happen eventually, when the time comes, and I will make that decision myself on my own timeline. But this house is not going anywhere before I'm ready. There is a guest room with a quilt, and a nightlight shaped like a star, and a little boy who is welcome in it whenever his father finds the grace to allow it. I am 64 years old. I survived a stroke. I discovered that my own son had hired a lawyer to take everything I owned, and I stood in a conference room and said no in a voice that did not shake. I spent 15 years making myself smaller, calling less, asking less, swallowing the hurt, because I didn't want to be difficult. I told myself that love sometimes looks like patience, that distance is manageable if you just adjust your expectations low enough, that a son who almost never shows up is still showing up. He wasn't. And what I know now, sitting in Howard's armchair in the October afternoon light, with a cup of tea going warm in my hands, and a child's drawing on my refrigerator, is that I was never invisible. I was just looking in the wrong direction. The people who see you are there. They've been there. Sometimes the person who sits in a hospital chair for 4 days, with her sneakers still on, is someone you stayed after class for on an ordinary Thursday, when she needed somebody to look at her and say, "You matter." Sometimes the whole point of that moment, all those years later, is that it circles back, that it comes home. Tucker is coming again on Saturday. He asked if we could make cookies. We are going to make cookies. And for the first time in longer than I can name, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything.